Good evening and welcome everyone to the Draft Housing Needs Report workshop hosted by the City of New Westminster. My name is Jennifer Miller. I'm the Manager of Public Engagement at the City, and I will be supporting this evening's session as facilitator. Thank you so much for being here. So I want to let everyone know that we are recording the session. We will just be recording the presentation and the question and answer period right after that. And then we'll be pausing the recording as we move into small group discussions. So just a couple of Zoom tips for you as we get going this evening. I'd ask that you please stay muted unless you're speaking. And I would say feel free to keep your video off while we're doing the presentation portion of the evening, but we will ask you to have your video on so that we can see all your faces during our discussion portions a little bit later on. All right, so the purpose of our session this evening is to share some information with you about the Draft Housing Needs Report that has been prepared for the city, respond to your questions on the report, and also to discuss your housing concerns and ideas. So we do have some time for small group discussions and then a whole group share back a little bit later on in our agenda. So the agenda for this evening, we're here until about 7:30. We're in our welcome and housekeeping kind of intro at the moment, and then we'll have a brief presentation on the Draft Housing Needs Report, some time for questions, and then we'll move into small group discussions talking about your housing concerns and your ideas. We'll come back into whole group and share back what we talked about, and then we'll have probably a few more minutes if there are any additional questions or comments, and we'll look to be wrapping up as I said, by 7:30. So my role as the facilitator will be to help us move through the agenda, keep an eye on our time, and I'll be helping to moderate the whole group discussions, and I'll also facilitate one of the small groups. And I'll help to remind us all of the participation guidelines as needed. So I just would like to invite everyone to commit together to our guidelines for this evening's workshop. So we talk about creating a safe space where everyone can feel comfortable participating. And I have a role in that, but we all need to join in committing to doing that together. We're all responsible for creating a safe place where people feel that they can share their views and their thoughts. So I'd like to suggest these guidelines for us for this evening. Just respect and keeping that top of mind as we move through our time together. Balancing airtime, so when we do get into our small group discussions, just to give space to allow everyone a chance to contribute. Challenge ideas, not people. Of course, it's healthy to disagree and have debate, but we ask that you please not make it personal. And finally, we only speak for ourselves. So you may have had some great conversations with your neighbors about things like housing, but they're not here tonight, you are. So we ask that you just speak for yourself. All right, so with that, I want to bring up a poll just to get a sense of who's in the room with us this evening. So I'm going to launch the poll and ask that you please take a moment to just respond. So for the purposes of this topic on housing needs, which group best describes you for the purposes of our conversation? I'll give people a few seconds here to answer the poll. All right. All right. And so a few people haven't answered, but I think we've got all the answers we're going to have. So I am going to share those results out. So it looks like we've got mostly homeowners who are here this evening, but we have someone representing an advocacy group, and we have some renters as well. So thanks so much for giving us a sense. We will do introductions in our small groups as well, so you'll have a chance to share who you are with your small group a little bit later. All right. So final notes from me before we launch right into our presentation is just want to introduce to you the staff team who's on the session this evening. So for city staff, we have myself, and again, my name is Jennifer. I'm the manager of public engagement at the city. And then we have our social planning team who's here. So we've got John, Claudia, Anur, and Emily, who's brand new at the city. So join me in welcoming Emily to her new role at the city here from the city staff social planning team. And the author of the draft housing needs report, Margaret, is here. She's a housing consultant working with the city. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Margaret to take us through our brief presentation about the housing needs report. So Margaret, I'm going to give you control so that you can move your own slides. Give me 1 second here. You should get a little note from me saying I've given you control, and you should be able to control the PowerPoint now.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. And yes, I can control it. That's great. Thanks, Jennifer. So my brief presentation will focus on 3 topics. The first is some background information about housing needs reports. The second is a description of some of the key housing issues in New West. And the third is a high-level summary of the findings. But first, what is a housing needs report? So the screen shows that the report is basically a document that identifies existing and projected gaps in the housing supply. And in the case of New West, we've done it for 10 years using available statistics and community input. So it's an information document only that uses the best available sources and methods to provide a picture of the housing situation in New West. So why do we do housing needs reports? Well, the province requires local governments as of 2018 to prepare these reports every 5 years. So that is, this is the first housing needs report that the city has done, at least under the auspices of this legislation. The housing needs report allow for better targeted interventions, be they at the city level, the provincial level, or federal level, based on a really good understanding of housing needs. They can also act as a resource for organizations that are seeking funding, for example, for new non-market housing. And they can also inform the development of future city affordable housing strategy. So this graphic describes the process for developing the housing needs report to this draft stage and beyond. So we began in May 2020 with collecting and analyzing a sizable amount of data that the province requires, along with supplemental information pertinent to New West. This was followed by interviews with key informants who were involved primarily in the nonprofit and social housing sectors for their views on housing needs. And this culminated in the draft report and summary, which is now available on the Be Heard platform, in which we're discussing tonight. We're at this point involved in community engagement, seeking input through this workshop, through an online survey, and through engagement activities with persons with lived and living experience of housing vulnerability. And the final report will go to council, and it will include a summary of what we heard through this community engagement process and modifications to the draft report as necessary. And the aim is to take this report to council in the summer of 2021. So first, some definitions. I'll review 3 of the terms that are used in the report here. There's lots of others, and there's a huge glossary with lots of definitions in the report. But the main one I think that most people are concerned about is affordable housing. And so this report uses the standard definition, which is that 30% or less of household income before tax goes towards paying for housing costs. So this is the most common definition. This is the definition employed by Statistics Canada and CMHC, so Canada Mortgage and Housing Corporation. And it's quite broad. There are other definitions that get a little more refined, but this is a good measure. And we are typically most concerned with affordable housing for those at the lower end of the income spectrum. So there are 2 types of affordable housing that the report refers to. The first is non-market housing. And so non-market housing is what you might know of as social housing or cooperative housing. This is generally subsidized by senior levels of government. Rent is determined by ability to pay, not by the market. And eligibility criteria determine who is eligible to access this housing. Below market housing is a sort of relatively new term, and it is an attempt by the city to address housing needs of those who perhaps aren't eligible for non-market housing, but who have difficulty accessing housing in the marketplace. So below market housing could be owned by a private agency or by a nonprofit agency, and it is aimed at households earning $30,000 to $75,000 per year. So what are the sort of key takeaways of the draft report? I'll spend a little more time later going into some of the details, but just in the sort of highlight level, most New Westminster residents are well housed. While this is a housing needs report and we do highlight the areas of need, there remains the fact that many New Westminster residents are well housed. Others are struggling, mostly with affordability, although there are other challenges that have to do with security of tenure, the condition of their unit, or the suitability of their unit for their household size. So the composition of those affected does appear to be changing. And this is particularly related to affordability, but also other issues. So traditionally, it's been very low income and low income renters that have had affordability challenges, and this definitely remains the case today. But there are new concerns that affect households that are further up the income ladder, so moderate income households, for example. So city and other housing initiatives have helped, but not solved this costly problem, which generally requires all levels of government and others to participate in solving. So I'm going to first talk about people who are experiencing homelessness. So homelessness remains an issue in New West as it is elsewhere in the region. New West had at least 123 people who were homeless as of the last count in March 2020. However, counts are always an underestimate, and the numbers have possibly grown since the pandemic has arrived. But you'll see from the chart that the number of homeless has been relatively stable since about 2011, and even actually went down in 2014. Oh, that could be just an aberration of the count. But the fact is there's been some relative stability in the numbers since 2011. Which is good, although a reduction would be better. And it doesn't mean that it's the same people that are homeless just because the numbers are stable. It just means that rather as people do become housed, perhaps as in the new modular housing the city has recently contributed to, more people have become homeless. So renters are a group that is most affected by housing affordability, housing insecurity, and limited supply. So while 44% of New West households are renter, over 2/3 of the households in need are renters. And so by any measure of affordability, renters are typically worse off than homeowners. And in particular, renters who are seniors or lone parent families at least are worst off in terms of the rate of core housing need. So the chart on the right shows that there is a gap of $10,000 annually between median renter household income, which is $44,400, and the $54,000 roughly annually needed to afford to rent a vacant one-bedroom unit in New Westminster. So this means that at least half of the renters, those earning below the median income, are priced out of a one-bedroom apartment in the city. But on the other hand, it does mean that those 50% who are earning more than the median, some of them will be able to afford a one-bedroom. So why do we have these issues in the rental pool? And that's because we have very persistent low rental vacancy rates and a wait list for non-market housing. So insufficient non-market housing. So prospective homeowners are another group that we are paying a little bit of attention to these days. While low-income renters experience the most housing issues, prospective homeowners now face challenges as well, both in terms of affordability, but also choice in terms of, particularly for families, family-friendly housing options. And we see that ever-rising home prices that are out there, again, even today in the news, you'll read about it. And we wonder how we or our children, depending on our age, will ever afford to buy a home. And this chart shows that, in fact, there is a gap of about $54,000 per year between a median income household in New Westminster and the amount needed to afford to buy a duplex, a triplex, or a townhouse. So moving on to housing need and demand. First, just a couple of definitions. The two terms are used in the draft report, and they both have slightly different meanings. So housing need describes the housing required for people or households with very low incomes who cannot afford to pay market prices. Housing demand, on the other hand, is housing for households that do have the ability to pay for market rate housing. So just a slight difference there. And that has to do with their higher incomes. So this chart on the left does provide, and on the right provides some of the key findings with respect to housing need and demand in the report. We've developed estimates for different time periods, for different household income levels, by tenure, and by number of bedrooms. So on the left is a chart that shows housing demand and housing need for two different time periods. So 5 years and 10 years, and then an annual estimate. So housing demand is estimated at about 5,400 units over 10 years, and that works out to about 541 units per year. Housing need is estimated at about 1,700 units over a 10-year period, and that works out to about 174 units per year. And on the right are the findings by number of bedrooms and by renter income level. So by number of bedrooms, we find the greatest demand is for 1-bedroom units, followed by 2-bedroom units. And this holds true for 5 years or for 10 years. But it's not to say that 2- and 3-bedroom units aren't in demand. So if we add the demand for 2- and 3-bedroom units, that works out to 858 units. So they're roughly equal. So those larger units would be suitable for couples and families. So by renter income level, we find that most renter demand occurs among very low income households. So those earning below $35,000 per year. And that is estimated at 575 units, with 380 units estimated for households with slightly higher incomes between $35,000 and $60,000. And again, the same pattern holds true for a 10-year period. So just keep in mind that these numbers use the best available data and forecast methods, but that they are still estimates, and they can be used for planning purposes, but they're not in any way targets, for example. And then finally, this report provides estimates of housing need and demand where possible for these population groups and housing types listed on your screen. I won't go through all the detailed numbers for these groups, but you will find them in the draft report and the summary. So that's it for me, Jennifer.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that presentation, Margaret. So we'll spend some time now just with any questions that attendees have or participants have for Margaret or for the city social planning team. So we'll ask you to please use the raise hand feature on Zoom to ask a question. So you should see in your Zoom menu There's a button right here that's called reactions, and if you click on that, it will open up a menu of options, and if you'd like, you can give us hearts and thumbs up and claps to express some of your feelings, but use that raise hand button to let us know that you would like to ask a question. And I see that Elliot has got his hand up. So I'm going to call on you in just a second here, Elliot. And I'll just let everyone know, like, I know Margaret just presented a lot of statistics and numbers for us. So if there's any slides you'd like me to go back to in the presentation or you want to have another look at, please feel free to let me know, and I'm happy to do that. Elliot, so please go ahead and ask a question.
Thank you. I'll switch to a heart here in a moment after what I'm sure will be a very thoroughly satisfying answer. I have two questions, actually. I hope that's okay. The first question is, so thank you, Justin, first for that presentation, both Jennifer and Margaret. My first question, I guess, is around how individuals with lived and living experience of housing insecurity were consulted. And then the second question is around the measure of unaffordability and whether or not income volatility in terms of month-to-month income fluctuations are factored into measures of unaffordability or housing insecurity in those statistics that were given. So those are my two questions. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Elliot. Margaret, please go ahead.
I wonder if Claudia wants to address the first question about the persons with lived and living experience, and I can do the second.
Sure. And Claudia, do you want to just introduce yourself, remind everyone who you are?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Claudia Frere, and I am a staff part of the social planning team. My role is as a housing and social planner. So Elliot, that's a great question. Thank you for asking it. So as Margaret mentioned, in the first phase of the report process, Margaret did consult with nonprofits and faith-based organizations that were housing providers, which informed the draft report. Now, after this workshop, and one of the next steps that we'll be taking is to connect with the Community Action Network training graduates. So the city participated in collaboration with the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition in a program to train individuals with lived and living experience of poverty and housing vulnerability to engage in city processes and inform much of the work that we do. So that will be we'll be hosting an event, sort of a focus group with that group that will form part of the feedback that then is integrated into the final draft.
It looks like John wants to jump in here. Is it on the same question, John?
It is.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So I just wanted to add that we had planned to engage people with lived and living experience, but of course this work was interrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic, and so some of that work was paused. So ideally we would have engaged those individuals earlier on in the process, but with the pandemic, we are having to engage them now. I will say that yes, those individuals have graduated. They do come with a full range of experiences. We have some of these individuals in the Community Action Network that have dealt with settlement issues, poverty, homelessness, and a number of other issues. So they do represent a number of different voices, and we're hoping that that diversity can really inform this. And more importantly, as we move forward with regards to our partnership with the BC Poverty Reduction Coalition around the Community Action Network, we're looking at engaging people with lived and living experience, not just as subject matter experts, but also helping us facilitate engagement with other community members that may have those same vulnerabilities. And that'll be essential when we start doing the follow-up work to this, which would be around a housing action strategy. So I just wanted to highlight that unfortunately, given the pandemic, it has curtailed some of the activities, but we want to make sure that voice is represented, and it will be a significant voice as we also move forward into the next stage.
Thanks for that, John. So Margaret, do we need Elliot to recap his second question, or have you
No,
got it there?
I think I have it.
Okay.
Hi, Elliot. Now that's an interesting question. So you're asking about whether income volatility is taken into account in measures of housing affordability. And I think I would have to say the answer is sort of yes and no. To the extent that one's income in any year is captured in the census, for example, to the extent that it fluctuates or you go from period of work to non-work, that total amount will be captured in the census. And those are the numbers that we use to determine housing affordability. But there is no specific measure that looks at income volatility that we used in this report.
Does that answer your question, Elliot?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think it's interesting. To me, it seems like something that's worth, I mean, it's beyond the scope of this kind of specific housing needs report, but it seems something that's worth tracking, that given that, like, if I'm not able to pay rent in 1 month because of a significant drop in income, that's important to capture in terms of understanding housing insecurity versus kind of an average of what I have, rather than taking my annual income and averaging it over each month is not necessarily representative, especially given changing realities of work and other things. So just more of a comment, I guess, now.
Yeah,
so.
Just unfortunate we're limited by the data.
Great, thank you. All right, Carla, I see your hand. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
We can.
Oh, wonderful. So I'm kind of wondering, I know that especially for those people who are low income, that you have provided information based on their income and housing. However, sometimes there are other solutions that can help to meet the needs of the gap in rent. And I'm just wondering if those were looked at for this report. Was it only based on income or other barriers that can come up within the rental market that could prevent people from finding a place to live?
Thanks for the question,
So-
Carla. Margaret.
I think the answer again is yes and no. So one of the measures we used was core housing need. This is produced by CMHC, and this is a measure that considers housing affordability, also housing condition, and also the suitability of a unit, whether a unit is of an adequate size for the household that is occupying it. So we didn't only look at affordability, we did look at some other indicators, but primarily affordability is one of the primary considerations. We don't have a lot of information about, for example, security of tenure, which is, I think, a big concern, but we did reproduce some stats in the report that City of New West has tracked in terms of rent evictions.
Yes, sorry, what do you mean by security of tenure?
So
would that be like for the co-op housing or something like that?
No, when I say security of tenure, I mean, a tenant's feeling of security and the legal situation of being secure in your rental housing unit.
Okay, so I'm not sure if this is the place for it, but I came here today hoping to bring up two concerns. One of them is a barrier that I experienced when looking for housing recently, in which people discriminated against roommates. We weren't allowed to rent or apply for rentals because my roommate and I are roommates. And that was a way to, of course, together to make that gap. And I thought that was significant. And if you look at the residential tenancy branch requirements, they have, of course, the human rights codes for not being able to discriminate, but roommate is not one of them. Another one is, I would say, income or poverty. Which are, so they can discriminate. And so I guess you're picking up what I'm suggesting is that if you have two low income people, but they're able to sort of share a 1 bedroom, so they don't have a social space, but having a warm place is really important. They can overcome that, and this is creating problems because people are discriminating against that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Carla. And we will invite you to share more about that experience when we get into the small groups. But you make a really good point there about those real life experiences where, yeah, if you can make it work, you should be able to make that work and be able to find a place. So thank you for that. Anything else to add, Margaret, in response to Carla's comment?
I would just say that the survey that we have launched with this engagement does include a question that asks about barriers, and that is one of the responses that is offered as a choice. So I encourage you to fill out the survey, and that we can use that data.
Yeah, absolutely.
Of course I did, Margaret.
Great.
Of course I did. And I'm here to learn more because it happened to me and it was a shock. And I do see this as a viable solution for many people, actually. And it's happening more often. And anyway, it's a way to also create some density within the city. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Carla. Look forward to hearing more from you in the group discussion. Other questions for Margaret or for the city's team at this time? Any slides you'd like me to go back to have a look at some of the numbers that Margaret shared with us? I'm actually not able to see everybody because I'm doing the screen share, so I can't see if you're waving at me. So if you have if you can't figure out or haven't found the raise hand button, but you would like to ask a question, please feel free to just unmute. Jonathan, I see your hand. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi everybody. I was just wondering how these numbers of units that are forecasted as being needed, how that compares to, say, the past 5 years of development or the past 10 years of development. How much? What is that? Does that comparison say anything about how maybe desperate it is or how achievable it is? Where on the spectrum are these numbers?
Thanks for that question, Jonathan. Margaret.
So yes, good question. So on the housing demand side, so the market side, I think the future estimate was for about 540 units per year. And in fact, in the past 10 years, the City of New West completions have been around 600 or 650 per year. So with a lot of variability, but the average worked out to about 650 per year. On the non-market side, or on the housing needs side, I'd say the picture is not as good. So federal and provincial funding for non-market housing, new non-market housing virtually stopped in the early 90s, and there's been very little new development. It's recently restarted, but I would say, I actually asked the city for stats on this today, that there's been virtually no new non-market housing built in the City of New West, so that the city is not meeting its these housing demand estimates. Now, this is not necessarily a city responsibility, but a function of the lack of senior government funding. So yeah, that would be my answer.
Thank you.
I see your hand there. Please go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up with Margaret's comments, and Claudia may have more information. We have had a limited increase with regards to non-market housing. We did have our small sites affordable housing, which resulted in projects at 43 Hastings Street and also on Ewan Avenue. And those were city initiated, one where we actually provided the land at no cost. The other one was a 60-year lease. And just to Margaret's point, both federal and provincial funding is more available now. And the city is looking at partnering with BC Housing and also taking advantage of federal government funds to develop non-market housing. Because we have had a significant increase in purpose-built market rental, but that's new rental housing. Rents are quite substantial. And what we're hearing is where we need to really focus our attention is around below and non-market housing. I should say we also are working with BC Housing around additional supportive housing and additional emergency shelter. So there should be some announcements around additional emergency shelter capacity and supportive housing likely in the next few months. So trying to meet those needs with those emergent needs, but also working with the city levels of government, and also looking at what we can do as a city with regards to increasing, making available land, because that's usually a way to partner with the city levels of government. And also looking, we do have a housing reserve fund. It's fully allocated at the time, but we're looking at how we can grow that fund so we can better partner both with the senior levels of government, but also with faith-based nonprofit organizations. So it is a real focus of the city.
Thanks for that, John. All right, I will call one more time for questions, and then I think we'll move into our breakout discussions. We will have some more time when we come back into whole group as well, if other questions come to your mind through the discussions. And Margaret is going to try to kind of float between our two groups if you have any questions for her as we get into the discussions. So I'm not seeing any hands up, so I'm going to move on to just giving us a bit of an overview of our breakout discussions. So we are going to split into two groups, and we'll have staff who are supporting in the role of facilitator and also note taker, and some who will just be there to listen to the discussion and hear your ideas and thoughts. And we are looking to discuss two questions with you all this evening. So what New Westminster housing issue most concerns you and why? And then thinking a little bit about what should be done and how could these concerns be addressed. So we do want to be clear with you that the housing needs report is really, the purpose of that is to really identify those needs and gaps, as opposed to looking really closely at solutions or what could be done. So Margaret, I don't know if you had any more to share with us, just in that context setting. We know that it's important to think about ideas and to start exploring what solutions there could be. But just maybe, Margaret, would you remind us of the purpose of the housing needs report and how kind of the plans about how to address the need come a little bit later?
Right. So a housing needs report is basically an information document that seeks to express in numerical form, but also by including stories and personal opinions of residents, the current housing need and demand, as well as future housing and demand. And the idea is that this can then be used as a tool for other types of work that might go on. So for example, nonprofit housing agencies that might want to apply for funding, they might want to use a housing needs report to bolster their application. The city would, if it was going to do a housing strategy in the future, it would look to the housing needs report for some evidence of housing need and demand. So that is the main purpose of a housing needs report.
Perfect. So we will be recording your ideas and suggestions, and they will not be lost, but just wanted to be upfront about the primary purpose of the housing needs report, and share a little quickly about the next steps, and just how you can share more of your input with us in addition to this evening's workshop. So for those, I expect you probably have explored our Be Heard New West project page on the housing needs report. But in case you're not familiar with it, please do have a look at beteardnewest.ca, and you can click into the housing needs report project page. We have lots of information on there. The draft report is there, as well as a draft summary, kind of a shortened version is there as well that you can have a look at and read through. It's got a lot of the information that Margaret shared this evening, but even more. And we have a survey there, and then we've got an ideas brainstorm as well that you can contribute to. So we'll have all of those feedback tools, input tools open until May 16th. Please do tell your neighbors, your friends, and your networks here in New West about it, and ask them to also share and weigh in. So that community engagement process is open until May 16th, and then Margaret and the city team will be working to summarize that feedback and update the report, finalize the report, incorporating the community's input. We will be sharing back a summary of what we've heard and also the full survey report. Those will be shared back on the Be Heard page. And then we'll be looking to come to council in July of this year with the final report for their endorsement. With that, I am going to share our final poll and just ask you to let us know how this workshop was for you. So we've got 2 questions here. You may have to scroll down if they're both not visible, but just asking you to let us know if it was easy for you to participate in the engagement, and also that we hope you felt encouraged to share your input as well with us. So I'll leave this up for a moment here and just give people a chance to respond. That question about it being easy to participate, I know it's a little different than back in the days when we could just be together in person, but you didn't have to maybe get out of your PJ pants, so that's happy.